Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we last debated this bill in second reading, I said that protecting someone's freedom for their own safety is not a licence to own their life, but a duty to help them find it again. That principle still guides us today, because good intentions alone do not mend a troubled system. Compassion without competence is not care, it's sentiment without substance. And at second reading, I spoke of bridges and rough roads, of how resilience and recovery depends on the strength of the structures that carry people through their hardest times. Tonight, we return to that bridge. The question before us is not about whether we believe in reform, after all, there's cross-party agreement on that, but whether this government has built the foundations to make it stand. Warm words are plentiful, but the reality is that too many people are still falling through the gaps. The tensions are still present, community services stretched, and families left navigating a maze of bureaucracy while waiting for help that may never come. We all know that reform cannot be delivered on aspiration alone. It requires a delivery plan, a workforce, and a system capable of learning from its own mistakes. We know the chapter on delivery is missing from the 10-year NHS plan, and there's further risk tonight that we miss another opportunity. After all, the principles in this bill are the right ones. They're even on the front of the bill. Choice and autonomy, least restriction, therapeutic benefit, treating the person as an individual. But these principles need power behind them, and that power lies in delivery. And this report stage is our chance to turn those words into commitments, which is why if I turn to new clause 31, it would require the government to publish a fully costed delivery plan within 18 months of the Act passing, setting out how integrated care boards and local authorities will deliver adequate community services. Crucially, this plan must be developed through consultations with those who know best. That is vital because while we support the many aims of the bill, the government already has a pretty dismal record of announcing reforms without any credible plan to deliver. Take the ongoing NHS reorganisation. In March, ministers made a surprise announcement of the abolition of the NHS England and its absorption into the Department of Health and Social Care. Yet 6 months on, they can't say what it will cost, they can't say how many staff will be lost, and how it will be paid for. The Health Service General reports growing confusion inside the system and warning from NHS leaders that the lack of clarity risks paralysing decision-making. Written questions to government simply receive the answer, some upfront cost in the millions. Yet independent estimates say it's over £1 billion, and even the Chief Executive, Sir Jim McKee, points out that the Treasury must agree funding for the Integrated Care Board redundancies within weeks, or the NHS will have to turn to Plan B. The same chaos is playing out across our Integrated Care Boards, with local leaders warning there's already destabilisation due to the 50% reductions. If the ministers can't manage their own top-down reorganisation, why should anyone believe they can deliver a more ambitious overhaul of the mental health services without a clear, costed plan? Especially when waiting lists have risen in the last 3 consecutive months. And this Labour government has already cut the proportion of spending on mental health. As Dr. Lade Smith, CB, the President of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, said at the time, it is illogical that the share of NHS funding for mental health services being reduced at the time of soaring need and significant staff shortages. The proportion of NHS funding allocated to mental health services will decrease. Going on, she said, that will equate to these vital services missing out on an estimated 300 million or more that they would have received if the share had been maintained.
We'll give way. I'm extremely grateful to him giving away on that point. It's the decrease in the proportion of the mental health investment standard for the first time in what I believe is 9 years is incredibly concerning. It was hard-won cross-party support that made that go up over time, and it was incremental, but it was starting to make a difference to the system. Would you agree with me that it would be helpful if the government could clarify whether or not this is going to continue beyond 25-26? When Baroness Merrin came to our committee, she could not confirm that, and if there is not going to be a continuation, the system needs to know by frankly, now, so that they can prepare for it adequately.
The Chair of the Select Committee is absolutely right. A simple answer from the Minister today in report stage would go a long way to alleviating those fears from the mental health sector, so I look forward to the Minister's response. Turning to Amendment 40, which would add a simple but important requirement that each statutory care and treatment plan must include an assessment of the level of risk to the public safety posed by the patient in the community. Now, the purpose of this bill is right. The government wants to make it more compassionate, therapeutic, patient-centred and modernised. We strongly agree with this ambition. But modernisation must go hand in hand with public confidence. The public and patients themselves must know that every plan for treatment and discharge is rooted not only in care, but in safety. And in committee, I argued that the framework still omits one dimension, and that's public safety. As far as I can see in the bill, there remains no explicit requirement for clinicians to assess and record the level of risk posed to those in the public. I will give way.
On that point, it's an excellent point, and I have had constituents who have come to me with patients who have been released with schizophrenia, for example, and they were released before the psychosis had fully passed, and one of them, it was a very tragic situation that ended in a death of another resident. And all of this could have been prevented had the patient been kept safely in a bed until they were able to be at a proper level of medication and psychosis had passed. So will the Shadow Minister agree with me that this is something that we need to take forward in this bill? It's a win-win for all parties, and it needs to be brought forward in this bill. Yeah.
Can I thank her for raising that tragic case? And these are the kind of cases that this amendment tries to actually deal with. We only have to look at the tragic cases of Nicola Edgington and Valdo Cocaine, how escalating risk happened, and that had huge consequences both to the family, the patients, and the victims here. And this is something that I did raise in committee, and the Minister gave a very thoughtful answer. He said, I quote, "If any risk at all to public safety is perceived, that must be documented. It's a basic expectation of the professional management of a particular patient that any risk identified to public safety and protection must be in there." And I welcome that. But my amendment simply asks, if this is indeed the government's position, then why not make it clear in the bill? Because the Minister did concede in the report. I take the Honourable Gentleman's point on whether or not it should be in the bill. I will come back to him on that, because I would be rather surprised if it was not made very clear somewhere that there is a basic expectation. If it were not, that would obviously need to be looked at, but I'm reasonably confident that he is. Yet, unfortunately, expected in practice is not the same as required in law. And we know from past reviews that there is a gap in the risk assessment and the communication can be too inconsistent. Putting it in statute would not be bureaucracy, it would simply clarify it. So I recognise the Minister may argue that it already exists in professional codes or in the Mental Health Act Code of Practice or even in risk management frameworks, but the statutory duty doesn't. And our amendment puts that squarely on the bill. Talking of safety, I want to speak to new clause 29, which would ensure that no child is placed on an adult mental health ward except in truly exceptional circumstances and only when demonstrably in the best interests. Now, the government argues that guidance already covers this, but the guidance has no teeth. It can be ignored or inconsistently applied. And again, guidance without legal backing is too easily ignored. Now, this was why the Joint Commission on Human Rights argued in their letter that this part of the bill needs strengthening. The Minister also said that placing these safeguards in legislation would remove flexibility from clinical emergencies, but our clause does allow for exceptional circumstances. It simply asks for them to be justified, recorded and subject to oversight. Because we know from research from the University College of London that there's been a 65% increase in the number of children and young people admitted for mental health disorders into adult wards, particularly those sharpest among teenage girls with eating disorders. Now, they are the most vulnerable, and they are the ones who bear the brunt of the cost.
My honourable friend, give way.
I will give.
With young women, this is another reason why I'm shocked that the mental health budget is decreasing when I am seeing an increase across my constituency, and I'm sure in many others, with girls presenting in secondary school with severe mental health, suicidal tendencies, eating disorders, and desperately crying out for additional mental health support.
Minister.
She is absolutely right that we need that support there. And it's not the budget that's reducing, fortunately, but it is the proportion which shows you the priorities that are being given by this government when it comes to mental health. I'm concerned that without this clause, that when something goes wrong, when a child is harmed, traumatised or placed in adult ward without proper justification, it's going to be little comfort to the family that, to say, guidance was breached. Now, turning to children, Amendment 41 stands out for a simple but vital principle that when a child is detained under the Mental Health Act, the person legally recognised to act for them, the nominated person, holds parental responsibility. Only where there is legitimate safeguarding concerns should that be set aside. And now, at first glance, this may seem technical, but it speaks to something profound about how the law views childhood, family, and the balance between protection and autonomy. The government are right that the bill modernises the old nearest relative system, which was too rigid, too bound by bloodlines, and at times blind to the complexities of family life. Under the bill as drafted, though, a current 16 deemed competent could nominate any adult, that could be a 19-year-old boyfriend or peer, as someone exercising control. Now, once nominated, that person gets full control. It's a legal authority. We need to ensure that the protection is there for the person if there's a breakdown in the family side. I see that I'm getting a nod from the Deputy Speaker, so I will look to solidify my comments into more erudite approach, especially when I'm instructed to finish within the next 2 minutes. But I guess that the point of this is we already have the fact that in law we have this joined with the Children's Act, which is directly what we have tried to do here to solve the problem. The Children's Act 1989 already defines the cornerstone of our foundations of what families should look like. And therefore, I believe the Minister, we have solved his problem about being concerned when they're in committee stage about the state of a family in the modern era, given the fact that in any other walk of life the legal framework exists. Why would we weaken it when it comes to mental health side of things? We've spoken both in committee and I was grateful to the Minister for meeting beforehand to discuss the issues around A&E and the grey area there. And I know he took on my comments then about solving the practicalities. I hope he will look at that seriously. And in closing, I argue that for this House, there is no greater moral burden than deciding for someone who cannot decide for themselves, where care ends and where control begins. This is exactly what this House is doing with this bill. How to protect without diminishing, how to act with compassion without surrendering precision, and how to empower without imposing. Involuntary care must never be the reflex of a system, be it under pressure or out of principle. Here, this House agrees this position, the challenge is delivery. Compassion demands more than good intentions, it demands delivery, discipline and detail. With this bill, the opposition lay the challenge of delivery. Not just a pledge, but a plan. Because the public will judge us all, not just on how kindly this House speaks, but how faithfully it serves those who depend on us most.